Hello, I'm Jane Hutchin. More than 50 years ago, a Melbourne band called The Flies won a competition for the band most like the Beatles. Their bass guitarist was a young Greek Australian named Themi Adams. Today, he's known as Reverend Themistocles Adamopoulos, and in a moment, I'll be sitting down with him here on 1+1. In his life as a Greek Orthodox missionary, Reverend Themi works in Freetown, Sierra Leone, one of the poorest countries in the world. He remained there through the 2014 Ebola outbreak. Supported by the charity Paradise for Kids, he's helping children orphaned by Ebola to rebuild their lives. Reverend Themi, welcome to 1+1.
Thank you, Jane, for the invitation.
Your parents were Greek, but lived in Alexandria in Egypt. Your dad was a successful banker and I believe a chemist. Your mum was a school headmistress. What was the event that made them, when you were around 10 years old, migrate to Australia?
The Greeks of Egypt had a lot of contact with the international world. They were cosmopolitan. The events of Egypt that led to the immigration were the takeover of the Suez Canal by the Egyptian nationalist leader Nasser. And we realized that the days of the European in Egypt were numbered. And so my parents decided that any future that myself or my sister would have would be overseas. So there were two nations that were in contention, Australia and Brazil. The Australian High Commission responded within days. The Brazilians were a little bit more laid back. So my father said to my mother, I think we'll go to Australia.
Reverend Themi, do you remember the journey to Australia?
Absolutely. We came on a ship called the Himalaya, which was P&O line, a British ship. Yeah, it was an exciting journey, but it was a long journey in those days. It was like, I think, 30 days or so.
So you arrived in Melbourne, but your family, I suppose, different to other Greek families, was a Greek family from Egypt.
Right.
Were you accepted? Was your family accepted by the Greek community?
In the beginning, it was difficult. They both had to work in factories until their qualifications were acceptable, and after a while, they were recognized. But in the beginning, I do remember my mother crying every day. Every day I would come back from school, she'd be in tears. She'd be missing her life in Egypt, Alexandria, which was an aristocratic life for her. And now she's working in a factory, being harassed and being mistreated, and she just wasn't used to that. Back in the late 50s, early 60s in this country, Australia, there was racism and there was an anti-Southern European kind of attitude. I recall, for example, taking the suburban train from St Albans in Melbourne to go to Flinders Street, the central railway station. And my mother and I would speak in French. My mother spoke French, and my dad was more into Greek. So I grew up with French and Greek. In one situation, one guy stood up and screamed out to my mother, this is Australia. We speak English here. You understand? So I immediately as it were, absorbed that and became ashamed of my Greek background. I became conscious of it. Not ashamed, I should eradicate that word. I became conscious that I was not a local Anglo-Aussie. My name was not Smith, it was not Jones, it was not... Those were the names that I could see at school were the acceptable names, right? Whereas a name like Adamopoulos was too foreign, too alien. I hope this has all changed, but in those days it was difficult to be an immigrant. And as I was the way out of it for me was to get acceptance into the Anglo Club, was football, Aussie rules. That was my first key. And the other way I got acceptance was by my knowledge of French, because we had French at high school. So just before the exams, I was Mr. Popular, you know.
You were known as a youngster as Femi Adams. So did you change your name purposely?
Excellent. No, up to high school, I was Adamopoulos. But then I took on the full, I guess, as you know, I played in a rock group, right? I mean, mate, you know, can you imagine, have you ever heard of a group called Emerson, Lake and Palmer? Well, how would it be like Emerson, Lake and Papadopoulos? Right? So there had to be something, something had to be done.
So the Adams was adopted when you started to play the bass guitar for the Flies.
Yes.
And where did you know how to play music? I mean, that seems like a bit of a leap from a kid who wants to play AFL, who was very bright. I think you were studying for a Bachelor of Commerce.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you're on stage with long hair, kind of screaming and doing the mod and quite hip, really.
What happened? We were at the right age, at the right time, with the right kind of musical background to be able to form a Rolling Stone Beatle group. And that's what we did, you see. And when we went to the Beatle concert, it was just, it was like another age had dawned upon the youth. These days, probably, I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that's how impactful they were. And then the Stones came here. And what happened was, we were already an established group in Melbourne, imitating the Beatles, right? And when the Stones came, I was going to their concert. And our manager called and said, are you coming to the concert? I said, yeah. Are you bringing your guitar along? I said, why? Because you're playing on it. It was like all my birthdays had come. I said, I'm playing on the Stones concert. It goes, yeah. I go, wow. So that was like 65, 66, and that was probably the height of our success, playing with the Stones, you see. And going to parties with it, Mick Jagger and so forth. And that was the height of my atheist days, right? Pre-Christian days, in terms of popularity and so forth. So there you go. That's another aspect.
I read that your sister would sell some of your personal effects. Is that true? Like
That's correct.
Toothbrushes?
We had fans, so-called fans. I would come out of the house, there would be people all over the place, right? Mary, she would do things. Yes, she would sell my toothbrush. She would, very good businesswoman, and she would sell anything that I had played with or touched with or something. But she drew the red line one day, right? When it was Saturday morning, I was asleep, and it was like, lazy Saturday morning. And it was like maybe 9 o'clock or 9:30, I woke up. And my bedroom was full of people. And they were all staring at me, asleep. I shut my eyes, I thought, I must be dreaming this. I opened my eyes again, the room was full of people. Mary was selling tickets. I think it was a premium price. Anyway, all right. So that was part of it. But then when I dropped out of it.
So it's immense fun, obviously, to talk about those times.
Yes.
But it didn't last long, did it? What happened?
I dropped out of it. I realized it was ephemeral, it was not going to last. And I had a university, career.
You were studying, weren't you?
Yes. But I dropped out of commerce, and I wanted to go back and study now something that I would enjoy. So I started studying political science, philosophy, and so forth. I got involved very heavily with politics and was convinced that Marxism was the way of the future.
And I guess there is a lot of social justice mixed up with that idea of revolution and Marxism.
Absolutely, that's
so I
the
can
point.
see why the social justice aspect of your life became perhaps something that you were searching a bit more for. What was the point where you decided that you could no longer be an atheist?
At the time, the aim of consciousness was the Marxist consciousness of the revolution. But what happened in the meantime was the Beatles were experimenting with Maharishi Yogi. They had gone to Nepal or India, and they were experimenting with something new that we were never aware of before, that there was something spiritual that was in the air, and that we had just focused on the material revolution, historical materialism, as Marx would put it. And now there was something ultra-materialist, supra-materialism that we never thought of before. So we then started experimenting with this idea of spiritual consciousness. I eventually reached a particular guru who had come to Melbourne, and I became a disciple of this guru, okay, who was a disciple of a 14-year-old boy who claimed to be the Avatar, who claimed to be God, all right? So here we are in Melbourne, in Carlton, being given directions towards cosmic consciousness of this guru. Now, one day I wore a cross. Now, it meant nothing to me then. It was simply a fashion statement. Black Sabbath wore crosses, Zeppelin wore crosses. Hey, it's a cool thing to do, right? So I wore my cross into the meditation room, right? And for some reason, the guy reacted, and he asked me to remove it. And I couldn't figure out why on earth a fashion statement would cause him concern. That contradiction made me start to think. And that, through also mystical experiences of Christ, convinced me of the existence of Christ. And that was the beginning of my conversion.
Well, as we can see from the way you are dressed, you are a member of the Greek Orthodox Church, and you did pursue a lot of studies in divinity. I think you went to Harvard, you went to many institutions, and now you are helping other people in Africa to overcome some of the huge gulfs that are in front of them. What was it that made you want to become a missionary in Africa?
Well, I was a lecturer here in Sydney. Even at Sydney University, I was lecturing, also in the theological college that we have here in Sydney of the Greek Orthodox Church, St. Andrew's Greek Orthodox Theological College. And it was wonderful because I was teaching young men to become priests, and I wanted to share with them the education I had received at Harvard, at Princeton, and so forth. It was excellent, and I was very happy. But what happened was that I saw the work of Mother Teresa, and I found myself as an academic, right, sort of squabbling about words and concepts, rather than what I saw in her. This is an elderly woman, frail, doing extraordinary work for God. And here I am, in those days, a younger man and full of strength and wanting to do something, and I'm squabbling about words, and I'm discussing this concept and that concept, which is fine, and there's nothing wrong with it, and I think it has to carry on. But at that time, I felt I was being called no longer involve myself in that, and to pull out of that, and to imitate Mother Teresa, to have her as my model. And I looked around and I thought, where do I do that? Do I do that in Australia? Where are the poor? Where is the crucified Christ? And I realized that I had been born in Africa, Alexandria, and therefore should I not go back to where I was born and help the people there? And that's the call to Africa. That's how it happened.
That was 2000. You went from Alexandria, you worked in Kenya for a time.
8-9 years in Kenya, Nairobi.
What was it in 2007 that made you move from Kenya to Sierra Leone?
Sierra Leone had just gone through a terrible war, a civil war. Hands were being amputated, the diamond issue. Legs were being amputated. Babies were being amputated, for crying out loud. Women were just abused left, right, and center. So, given this situation of total pain that this country was crying out, so I thought, where would Mother Teresa go? So I wrote to the Patriarch, His Beatitude, who then gave me permission. And then I was released from Kenya and I went to Sierra Leone. And there was nothing there. We had no church there. We had no buildings, nothing. So basically, I started off in a hotel and then moved to a house. And the church was a kitchen in the house. And from there, slowly, we have done what we have done over the years.
So you went over there as an officer of the Greek Orthodox Church.
Patriarchate of Alexandria.
And your funding came from the charity Paradise for Kids.
Correct, because the church is not in a position to be able to fund the mission. And Greece helps a lot too. Australia now is helping. America helps.
Reverend Themi, can I ask you, the first time you came across people who'd had their limbs amputated, babies who'd had limbs amputated, what did your heart tell you?
When you leave Australia and you go straight into the developing world, and particularly a nation that has suffered extraordinary pain, I believe we're in two different planets. You really have to rub your eyes to focus between one and the other. Even when I come back here, I still have to rub my eyes, just to make sure that it's real. Going to a nation like that was, and looking at these, you feel so bad. And all you can do is like, how can I help? So we've built shelter for people who have polio, for kids without arms and legs. We have shelter for them. We give them food, we give them money. And particularly during the Ebola crisis, that I was really worried because they go out begging as well, because they're used to begging. So even if you help them, they still want to go begging. It's like top up, And I thought, if these people are going to go begging during the Ebola crisis, we're all going to die of Ebola, because all you got to do is touch someone with
spreading
Ebola.
It.
You're dead, and there's no therapy, right?
I want to talk about Ebola in a moment,
Okay.
but I have to ask you, because I found some of the videos that I saw of you speaking with people, a room full of people who were in wheelchairs, who were missing limbs, who had clearly had the most awful times in their lives. And you had to somehow connect with them. I suppose I'm a little bit preoccupied with the brutality that man can inflict on man. Do you know whether you can explain why people do that to each other?
I think that's an excellent question, Jane. What connected me with them, you wouldn't think there'd be much. I'm a white man. That means privilege. I am educated, another privilege. I have access to Australia and the United States, that means money, another privilege. So how on earth could I connect with them? Well, I did, and the way I did it was very simple. I am visually impaired. I can hardly see you now. I have to guess where you are, okay? So when I spoke to them, I said, we who are disabled have to survive. So it was my disability, visual disability, that connected with them. So they know that I am like them in some ways. And that was the key. That was the key.
How did you become visually impaired?
When I was 18 and playing in a rock group,
which we've spoken about, the Flies,
I was out with a young lady walking in a park in Melbourne. And we were just walking and talking. And long hair, blah, blah, blah. I suddenly was surrounded by about 10 guys with crew cuts. It was the mods and the rockers. Okay, they were the rockers, we were the mods. And they really got stuck into me, seriously. I was knocked out and kicked in the head and so forth. The young lady that was sort of accompanying me, started screaming at the height of her voice, and I think that probably saved my life. I woke up in an ambulance, and I soon realized that one of my eyes had gone. Now, the other eye also went, so the switches on both eyes went, and I was left with little vision.
So you made a connection with the people of Freetown, Sierra Leone. When the Ebola crisis hit, what went through your mind? Did you think that all your community was going to perish?
When I heard that Ebola was coming into Sierra Leone through Guinea and Liberia, neighboring countries, I knew we were in for a rough time. I knew that. The people did not, because they'd never heard of Ebola. And anyway, they thought that this was just another campaign to raise money from the West and to, it was just another sort of developing nation kind of trick to attract foreign money. They didn't take it seriously. That's where the problem was. But also, neither did the World Health Organization. They didn't take it seriously either. It was only later on, when people were dying, that WHO finally woke up to the seriousness.
You are currently building orphanages for the surviving children who've lost their parents to Ebola. Is this a huge problem?
The children whose parents have died of Ebola is a huge problem, because this is what happens, Jane. You're a 10-year-old and your mum and dad have died, and you've seen them die a horrible death. You've seen that. And chances are that the corpse was in the house for some time before it was taken out. And then it was taken out by men wearing spacesuits, right? So you're in shock already, okay? Now, who's going to take care of you? Because we don't have social welfare system. So these kids are now left into the wind of life and whatever comes across. So we decided very early that we need to take care of some of them. We can't take all of them, but some of them. So we are already feeding a lot of Ebola kids. We are putting them through our school for free, of course. We are clothing them and giving them as much assistance as we can, while the buildings that we are going to build are going to go up.
Reverend Themi, you have said that when you get off the plane in Melbourne, what awaits you is ultimately a superficial society. Do you ever get angry that first world nations, developed nations, just don't seem to do enough for developing countries?
I want to withdraw, I did use the term superficial. I want to withdraw that term.
Really?
That was made in anger, I think, one day when I landed.
Why were you angry?
Because I saw the richness that was not appreciated. I thought back to the kids without shoes and the, and you feel sad and you feel angry. Why is this happening? How can it be that these kids, here have so much and they're never happy and they never seem to appreciate what they have, right? Australian society is unaware of the suffering of a lot of people around the globe. Unaware. Now I see that there's a bit of going on about the Syrian refugees. There's some consciousness going on there. But by and large, it seems to come in fashions, like it's a fashion now for the Syrian refugees. It was a fashion for the Ebola. It's like as if once the Ebola crisis is over, we're going to be forgotten. And once the refugee problem is finished, that's all over. Now we'll move on to another fashionable crisis. Australia is a rich country, a powerful country, an influential nation, and yet sometimes we miss the mark when it comes to charity.
A bit too mean, maybe?
I don't want to go there. I don't want to say mean. I just want to say that we are caught up in our own world here, and I can understand that being caught up in this world here in Australia is very enticing and very hypnotizing. But I would hope that we can also have a broader consciousness of who we are as a nation. We are a very blessed nation, and therefore we have responsibility.
I read that after you finished your time with the Flies, that you said you had been guilty about kind of that world. What advice do you have to people to stay grounded in the world today?
Look, as a teenager and as a young man, through being a rock star, quote unquote, and then getting involved with drugs and smoking pot and so forth, never shooting up, nothing hard. And now I'm aware that this attraction is still going on. I'm aware of ICE now, that this is a big deal. I'm also aware that young people are attracted to all kinds of experimentations, and I understand that. But my advice would be, we need to have moral values. We need to have what is right and what is wrong. Just because something is attractive doesn't necessarily make it right. Just because something is exciting doesn't necessarily make it right. Sometimes that which is very boring can be the right thing, and in fact that boring thing can turn out to be, in the end, a winning ticket. And eventually we have to consider that there is a God, and that we need to relate to that supreme God. And how do we relate to that?
Reverend Themi, it's been a great pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
1+1 is available on iView. You can browse the archive or contact us through the website. Stay in touch and leave comments via Facebook. You can also follow me on Twitter. I look forward to your company next time. From me, goodbye.